Thank you. As Subcommittee Chairman on Energy, it's kind of disappointing that the DOE failed to show up today. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act keeps being touted by those on the other side. The reality is, and most Americans know this, inflation has not been reduced despite all the federal money spent. These are U.S. tax dollars being spent. Republicans actually like renewable energy. We just believe that the free market should and has responded to those opportunities that keep being thrown out. But the reality is the administration's picking winners and losers within the energy sector. And Ms. Hughes-Cromwick, it's not a nudge. It was actually a shove by the federal government into one utopian direction that they have for this nation and the energy sector. Look, our energy matrix is complex, but it shouldn't be dominated by a single set of technologies, no matter how groovy those technologies may be. Sustainability is very critical, no doubt, but not at the expense of energy security and stability, which is what we think about. You know, energy is two factors. So you got transportation fuels, and that's fossil fuels and EVs, and you got baseload power generation. And as we think about our infrastructure, and we have to build out, if we go the EV route and continue that, we're going to have to build out an infrastructure, a utility power infrastructure in this country. But we're talking about supply chain issues today. How much money, Ms. Hughes-Cromwick, do you think that the IRA and the infrastructure bill put toward transformers, onshoring domestic supply chains for transformers, capacitors that make it all work? How much money do you think was put in for those critical components?
Thank you for that question. There's no debate, I believe, that we do need additional
How much money was put in from those into those critical components?
I am not an expert in the power.
Most of it, I'll yield back, I'll reclaim. Most of it was put in pushing for solar panels and wind generation. Very little was put into the things that actually will transmit the power to where it's needed to go. And now we're looking at transmission. You talk about permitting reform. I don't think you mentioned pipeline permitting reform, which is so necessary. Volkswagen came to South Carolina, and they just about didn't come to South Carolina because we don't have firm gas available for their production of electric vehicles and batteries in South Carolina beyond 5 years. So permitting reform's got to happen even for the electrical vehicle generation and production in this country. It's part of the process. So the critical infrastructure ought to include capacitors and transformers that are needed in this country. I want to shift real quick to nuclear power because I'm very bullish on it. But before I do, I'd like to ask Ms. Hughes-Cromwick, you worked at Ford. I asked the Ford guys a couple years ago about the end of life of these batteries. Nobody's thinking about the toxicity of these batteries that go in these electric vehicles 10 years from now when they have an end-of-life issue. Are they going to take them back? Are they going to reprocess them? I believe China will take them back and turn around and reprocess them and sell us new batteries again. So we've got to think about the end of life because there is a reality for where those batteries end up. Do they end up in a landfill? Are they reprocessed? Does Ford have any liability there for taking those back? And that's rhetorical. Mr. Harrell, Congress has provided a clear signal regarding nuclear fuel supply. Right? Unfortunately, DOE has thus far failed to follow that direction. How can developers of nuclear supply chain be confident that DOE will provide timely support going forward? That's both for domestic supply for enriched uranium and also the possibility of reprocessing spent fuel that sits at 121 sites around the country in 39 states that is an asset. I don't call it a waste. It's an asset that can be reprocessed and reused. I'd love you to speak about that.
Yeah, Congressman, it's a great question, and it's baffling. I mean, you heard from Secretary Granholm last week the same thing that she said 6 months ago on the fuel program that this Congress, on a bipartisan basis, authorized. It's supposed to both kickstart our supply of new advanced fuels, HALEU, and support investments here. And so I think Congress is going to have to nudge them even harder, I think, and push the administration to move forward because it's an urgent need. We can't be reliant on the Russians for either the fuel for our existing fleet that powers 20% of our grid in this country or the next generation of reactors.
The next generation is where we're focusing on. Yep. The last 25 seconds, I just want to say H.R. 1 was looking at returning America to energy dominance. And we have the resources here in this country to not only meet all of our domestic needs, but also to be a net exporter. Natural gas has helped America lower its carbon emissions. Natural gas is a vital component to make all of this work and help Other countries around the world lower their global emissions as well. Vietnam, China, Europe, which is reliant, some countries reliant on Russia, but now they've gotten off of that. They need U.S. exports of LNG, and they will lower their carbon emissions versus bringing coal-fired power plants back online because you made the asinine decision to take nuclear power out of your baseload generation in Germany, but yet you're going to run coal? It's just really crazy. Nuclear power is the future. We've got to have a domestic supply chain, but we also have to have the capacitors and the transformers and other things for our critical infrastructure to make it all work. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.